Welcome to Topicia Inner Clarity.
Settle in. Take a breath.
Today, we are embarking on a deep dive into something that touches, it touches every single hour of your day.
Every single hour, we're exploring the hidden architecture of your daily routine. And more importantly, the invisible forces that are shaping what you are ultimately capable of becoming.
Right. And to start, I want you to imagine a scenario, one that might feel incredibly familiar to you.
Probably so familiar that it's just the background noise of your life at this point.
Exactly. So you wake up in the morning, your mattress is perfectly engineered to support your spine.
And before your eyes are even fully open, before you've even fully registered that you are conscious, your hand instinctively reaches out.
You grab your phone. With just a single effortless flick of your finger, you summon this endless glittering stream of entertainment, news, and social validation.
All while your smart thermostat has already seamlessly adjusted the climate control to the exact cozy temperature you prefer.
The coffee maker is already brewing, and later today, any food you could possibly desire from anywhere around the globe will be delivered directly to your door.
By a stranger, hot and ready to eat.
You are essentially about to experience a day where all physical friction, all immediate danger, and all true uncertainty have been systematically eliminated.
Masterfully eliminated, really. And it feels incredibly good, doesn't it?
It feels completely safe.
But what if we told you that this exact safety, this flawlessly engineered, frictionless existence is quietly, methodically dismantling your spirit?
It's a profound, deeply unsettling question to sit with, and it forms the very core of what we're going to be rigorously examining today.
The research we are exploring tackles a theme that feels not just relevant, but urgently critical for anyone living in the modern world. Why comfort is slowly destroying your potential.
And what makes this deep dive so compelling is that we aren't just looking at this through the lens of, modern productivity hacks or self-help tropes.
No, we are going much deeper than that. The research draws upon the prophetic, almost terrifying warnings of the 19th century philosopher Friedrich Nietzsche,
along with the incredibly nuanced psychological frameworks of Søren Kierkegaard.
And of course, the stark realities of our modern existence. Our mission today is to carefully dismantle the pervasive cultural illusion that a frictionless life is a successful life.
We're going to reveal how our absolute obsession with ease, convenience, and safety is actually a deeply engineered trap.
So let's start unpacking this concept of the trap. The research uses a specific phrase that I found incredibly haunting. It calls it the velvet cage.
The velvet cage. We all talk about the comfort zone. From the time we are children, society essentially tells us that reaching this zone is the ultimate goal.
Right. You study hard, you work hard, you save your money. Also, you can finally arrive at a place where you are comfortable.
We view this comfort zone as a protective fortress, a castle we've built to keep the chaotic, dangerous world at bay.
But the research paints a radically different, far more sinister picture. It describes the comfort zone not as a fortress defending you, but as a cage holding you in.
A cage with velvet walls. It is incredibly soft, it is perfectly padded, it's temperature controlled. But make no mistake.
It is still a cage.
It is. And the true danger of this cage is that you don't even see the bars until it's far too late.
Because it doesn't scream at you. It softly whispers. It strokes your ego and convinces you to delay action.
It says, you're tired today, just rest. You can start that ambitious project tomorrow.
Or you don't need to have that difficult, uncomfortable conversation with your partner right now. You can do it tomorrow.
Until tomorrow becomes next week. Next week becomes next year. And eventually a lifetime of unfulfilled potential and quiet stagnation has just slipped by.
That insidious nature of the whisper is exactly what makes it so dangerous. To really understand the mechanics of this, we need to look at how the illusion of safety fundamentally misunderstands how growth operates.
In the natural world, right?
Yes. If we look at biological systems, comfort is actually a signal of decay. The research uses two very powerful, grounded analogies here to illustrate this point.
The first one is the tree.
Right. Imagine a tree that is planted inside a massive, perfectly climate-controlled greenhouse. It's given the optimal amount of water, perfect nutrient-rich soil.
And it is entirely sheltered from the elements. It never once faces the resistance of a strong wind.
On the surface, if you look at the leaves and the trunk, it appears incredibly lush and healthy. But its root system tells a different story.
Because it has never had to brace against a gale, It never receives the biological stress signal required to drive its roots deep into the earth.
Its roots remain shallow, spreading only across the very surface of the soil.
And the tragedy is that the moment the glass of that greenhouse shatters, the moment a genuine, unavoidable storm of life arrives,
That perfectly healthy-looking tree topples over almost instantly. It is entirely fragile.
the resistance of the wind isn't the enemy of the tree. The wind is the very mechanism that instructs the tree to anchor itself and become strong.
I love that analogy because it perfectly captures the hidden cost of protection. And the second analogy from the research is equally heartbreaking.
The bird in the cage.
Exactly. You have a magnificent bird built by millions of years of evolution to navigate the vast, unpredictable currents of the sky. But it's placed inside a beautiful, ornate cage.
Inside that cage, the bird is fed premium seeds every single day. It's shielded from the freezing rain, protected entirely from hawks and predators.
From an outside, purely statistical perspective, its life expectancy has skyrocketed. It is perfectly safe.
But the cost of that safety is total. It loses the muscle mass required to fly. It loses the instinct to navigate.
It essentially loses the sky. It survives, but it ceases to be a bird in any meaningful sense.
And this physical stagnation in the natural world mirrors our psychological and spiritual stagnation in the modern human world.
We trade our natural capacity for flight, our capacity for deep exploration, for taking terrifying risks, for genuinely becoming who we could be,
in exchange for a guaranteed yet deeply confined survival. Which leads us directly into what the research identifies as one of the most pervasive, invisible velvet cages of our modern era.
the salary trap.
Yes. The research goes into immense detail about how the modern economic and corporate system has effectively replaced the divine, terrifying chaos of human freedom with the dull, heavily medicated routine of predictable servitude.
Now, wait a minute. I want to push back on this a little bit because this is where it gets really uncomfortable for a lot of people, myself included.
It's a tough concept to swallow.
It is. When we talk about the salary trap, people might say, look, I have a mortgage, I have kids to feed. Getting a steady paycheck isn't servitude, it's responsibility.
Absolutely. But the research is making a much deeper critique here. It's not saying that earning a living is bad. It's saying that we allow the pursuit of that specific type of comfortable, predictable security to completely overwrite our deeper human drives.
We trade our most valuable, entirely finite resource, our actual living, breathing time on this earth, for a digital number in a bank account that merely allows us to stay afloat and buy more comforts.
And the insidious part is that we don't just endure this trade, we actively celebrate it. We optimize it.
We hustle. We perform for our bosses. We read books on how to squeeze 3 more tasks into a 50-hour work week.
We have somehow collectively turned corporate productivity into a profound moral virtue. The research notes that we have structured the entire landscape of our minds around a quarterly calendar that was never, ever made for our souls.
That is the critical distinction. It isn't about the immorality of a paycheck. It is about the total colonization of our inner life by the mechanics of that paycheck.
Nietzsche, who we will delve into much deeper shortly, would refer to this condition as the death of the will.
Think about the part of you that wants to create art, the part that rebels against injustice, the part that harbors a deep, almost irrational inner drive to transcend mere survival and do something magnificent.
In the salary trap, that part of your spirit is slowly tranquilized by the steady, hypnotic rhythm of the biweekly direct deposit.
We begin to mistake our obedience to the system for personal fulfillment. We mistake paying the bills on time and having a good credit score for actually living a life.
And the true genius of this system is that it gives you just enough. It gives you just enough money to buy the new phone, just enough praise in your annual review to stroke your ego.
And just enough lingering fear of losing your health insurance to keep you from ever walking away.
It keeps you from asking the truly dangerous, disruptive questions about who you are actually meant to become. Let's just pause on that reality for a second.
It's incredibly heavy.
The idea that we are not just victims of this system, but willing, active participants in the sedation of our own will.
And the psychological cost of this unprecedented ease is absolutely staggering. The research cites a psychological study from the University of Virginia that I found, frankly, terrifying.
I want to spend some time on this because it perfectly illustrates our broken relationship with ourselves.
The researchers essentially wanted to see how modern people handle completely unstructured, unstimulated time.
So they took participants, one by one, and placed them into a stark, empty room. There were no phones allowed, no books, no windows to look out of, no pens to doodle with. They were completely alone.
The instructions were simple. You have to sit here with absolutely nothing to do except be alone with your own thoughts for 15 minutes.
Now, the catch was there was one single item in the room, a button.
And the participants were told beforehand, and had even tested it, that pressing this button would deliver a painful electric shock to their ankle.
It sounds like a bizarre setup, but the methodology was designed to test the absolute limits of our tolerance for our own internal monologue.
The results of this study were not just revealing, they were a profound indictment of modern psychology.
A shocking, no pun intended, number of people, particularly men, but a significant portion of women as well, actively chose to press that button.
They preferred to voluntarily inflict literal physical pain upon their own bodies, rather than sit in silence with their own minds for just a quarter of an hour.
Let that sink in. 15 minutes.
Again, I have to be honest, if you put me in that room without my smartphone, without music to listen to, without a screen to look at, I can't guarantee I wouldn't start eyeing that button around minute 12.
But why? What does this actually mean about us? Why would an intelligent human being choose a jolt of physical agony over sitting quietly in a chair?
It speaks volumes about the psychological environment we have engineered for ourselves. We have built a modern world so completely saturated with external comfort, constant entertainment, and relentless digital stimulation.
That we have allowed a fundamental human muscle to completely atrophy. The ability to simply exist.
When the glowing screens go dark, when the notifications finally stop chiming, we are suddenly forced to confront the absolute silence of our own existence.
And for the modern person, that silence is terrifying. Because in the quiet, the noise of daily distraction fades, and the truth starts to speak.
It is the quiet, nagging realization that we might be living someone else's script. It is the heavy, undeniable awareness that we are ignoring our unlived potential.
To avoid facing this gaping existential void, we have developed a reflex to drown our boredom in a relentless, exhausting flood of dopamine.
We scroll endlessly, we consume media we don't even like, we fabricate dramas, we overwork, all to distract ourselves.
And the tragedy is, we call this state of constant, frantic distraction living.
We are terrified of the silence because the silence demands something from us. It demands that we look at the velvet walls of the cage.
It demands that we ask ourselves if this is all there is. And this brings us perfectly into the philosophical roots of why we do this.
Why are we so driven to avoid discomfort, yet so deeply unsatisfied when we achieve comfort?
To understand the mechanics of this, the research takes us back to the 19th century, to the incredibly influential, if somewhat pessimistic, philosopher Arthur Schopenhauer.
And his foundational concept, the will to life.
Yes, understanding Schopenhauer is absolutely essential to unlocking this entire deep dive. He offers a framework for human psychology that is stark, uncompromising, and deeply perceptive.
Schopenhauer proposed that the fundamental essence of the universe, and certainly of human beings, is this blind, irrational, striving force he called the will.
And the most crucial aspect of his theory is that all human willing, every single desire you have, whether it's for a cup of coffee, a massive promotion, or true love, springs fundamentally from a state of lack.
From a deficiency. You only want something because you do not currently possess it. And because you lack it, you feel a sense of deprivation. You suffer.
Therefore, to desire is to suffer. Schopenhauer uses incredibly powerful, evocative mythological analogies to illustrate the brutal mechanics of human desire.
The research highlights two specific myths here. Tantalus and Ixion.
Let's really look at these because they are the perfect metaphors for modern consumerism. Tantalus is a figure from Greek mythology who committed a grave offense against the gods.
And he was given a unique, eternal punishment in the underworld.
He is placed standing in a beautiful, clear pool of cool water, perfectly shaded by a lush fruit tree overhead. He is possessed by an agonizing, burning thirst and a gnawing hunger.
But every single time he reaches his hand up to pluck a piece of fruit, the wind blows the branches just out of his reach.
And every time he bends his head down to drink from the pool, the water miraculously recedes into the earth, leaving only dry mud.
He is trapped in the eternal agony of the unsatisfied desire. The goal is always visible, but never attainable.
It is a brilliant representation of the pain of lacking. And then we have Ixion.
Another figure punished by the gods, who is bound to a perpetually revolving wheel of fire that spins through the heavens for all eternity.
There is no rest, no destination, just the constant agonizing motion of the wheel.
These myths aren't just ancient stories. For Schopenhauer, they are accurate psychological maps of the constant agonizing state of human desire.
But Schopenhauer doesn't stop there. He introduces what we can call the pendulum effect, which might be his most devastating observation.
Let's say you are striving for a major goal. Perhaps it's buying your first house. While you are saving, working extra hours, stressing over the down payment, you are in a state of lack. You suffer the pain of wanting.
But what happens on the day you finally get the keys and walk through the front door?
You feel this massive rush of satisfaction for maybe a week, maybe a month if you're lucky.
And then it just becomes the place where you do your laundry. The thrill completely evaporates.
Precisely. The satisfaction is entirely, predictably fleeting. Once the lack is fulfilled, the will suddenly has nothing to strive for. The tension is gone.
And so the pendulum of human experience swings immediately and violently to the other extreme, the profound, deadening suffering of boredom.
The emptiness of having nothing to fight for. This state of boredom is so unbearable to the human psyche, much like sitting in that empty room at the University of Virginia,
that we immediately, almost instinctively, invent a new desire. We create a new lack.
Okay, I have the house, but now the kitchen looks outdated.
Yeah.
I need a remodel.
We invent this new lack just to give ourselves something to strive for, to keep the pendulum moving.
For Schopenhauer, human existence is fundamentally a tragedy because we are permanently trapped swinging endlessly between the acute pain of unfulfilled desire and the dull, suffocating ache of boredom.
We are on Ixion's wheel.
If we stop right there, it is a profoundly pessimistic view of life. You suffer if you don't get what you want, and ironically, you suffer even more if you actually do get it.
It makes you wonder why we even try. But this is exactly where the research highlights a massive, world-altering philosophical pivot. Enter Friedrich Nietzsche.
Nietzsche started his career deeply influenced by Schopenhauer. He read him, he revered him. But eventually, Nietzsche looks at this concept of constant striving and the endless pendulum, and he completely flips the board over.
He looks at human behavior and says, wait a minute, Schopenhauer is wrong about what we actually want. Humans don't just seek to fulfill lacks to return to a state of baseline survival or comfort.
They seek something entirely different. Nietzsche calls this driving force the will to power.
This pivot cannot be overstated. It is a crucial distinction that changes everything about how we view human potential.
Nietzsche argues that the fundamental drive of all living things, especially human beings, isn't mere self-preservation. A creature that only wants to survive will hide in a cave.
But humans don't just hide. The fundamental drive is expansion. It is growth. It is the active seeking out of resistance so that we might overcome it.
The will to power is the drive to master oneself, to master one's environment, and to constantly push beyond current limitations.
This concept directly and violently challenges the core assumption of modern society, which is essentially hedonism.
Let's define hedonism clearly in this context. Hedonism claims that the ultimate rational goal of human life is to maximize pleasure and minimize pain.
Under a hedonistic worldview, the ideal life is exactly that frictionless morning we described at the very start of our deep dive.
The perfect temperature, the endless entertainment, the zero effort. And our entire society, our technology, our economy, our apps, is built on this hedonistic premise.
Yes, and Nietzsche vehemently rejects this. He looks at what he calls the religion of comfortableness and declares it a complete and utter failure of the human spirit.
Why? Because according to the research, Nietzsche argues a point that is incredibly counterintuitive to the modern ear. Pleasure is not the goal of life.
Pursuing pleasure directly is a fool's errand. Instead, pleasure is merely a byproduct. It is what philosophers call an epiphenomenon.
An epiphenomenon, that's a heavy term. Can we ground that in a real-world example?
Absolutely. Think of someone who trains for and runs a grueling ultramarathon, 100 miles through the mountains.
From a purely hedonistic standpoint, this behavior is completely irrational. It is mathematically guaranteed to maximize pain, blisters, exhaustion, and nausea while minimizing physical comfort.
If pleasure is the goal of life, the ultramarathoner is insane. But why do they do it? They don't do it because their legs hurting feels good.
They do it because true happiness, the profound resident joy that Nietzsche values, only occurs when you encounter an immense obstacle, a terrifying resistance, and you successfully exert your will to overcome it.
The deep satisfaction they feel at the finish line is the epiphenomenon. It is the exhaust fume of overcoming, the feeling of power increasing.
So if you apply that to our modern pursuit of comfort, if you systematically use technology and wealth to remove all resistance from your life,
if you eliminate all struggle, all difficulty, all danger, all friction, you are simultaneously removing the exact mechanism required to experience genuine joy, deep growth, and triumph.
you are essentially starving your soul of its required nutrients.
You are. You render yourself entirely incapable of feeling truly alive. You essentially flatline your own existence.
You create a life that is completely safe and completely dead. Which brings us to one of the most famous, devastating, and frankly chilling prophecies in all of Western philosophy.
The research points us toward the concept of the last man. To understand this, we have to dive deep into the narrative of Nietzsche's masterwork, a book called Thus Spoke Zarathustra.
This story is so cinematic. Let's set the scene.
In this philosophical novel, Zarathustra is a prophet-like figure who has spent 10 years in absolute isolation high up in the mountains.
He has been dwelling in a cave, watching the sun, accumulating deep, profound wisdom about the nature of existence.
After a decade, he feels his cup overflowing. He realizes he must share this wisdom with humanity, so he leaves his cave and makes the long descent down the mountain.
He eventually arrives at a town, stepping into the bustling, noisy marketplace where a crowd is gathered. He stands before them to bring humanity a magnificent gift.
The teaching of the Übermensch. He wants to tell them about the higher human being, the one who creates their own values, who embraces struggle, and who continually overcomes themselves.
He speaks with passion and fire. But the crowd, they don't get it. They don't listen with reverence. They mock him.
They laugh at him. They are completely uninterested in greatness, danger, or overcoming.
Zarathustra looks at this crowd, and he experiences a profound realization. He sees that they are too far gone to be inspired by greatness.
So he decides he has to try a completely different, much darker tactic. In disgust, he decides that if they will not be inspired to strive for the highest heights of human potential,
he will try to shame them by showing them the absolute lowest depths of human decay. He describes to the crowd a creature, a future evolutionary state of humanity that he calls the last man.
And the description of the last man is essentially a mirror held up to the 21st century. The last man is the ultimate, finalized product of a civilization that has successfully chosen ease over struggle.
This is a being who has successfully engineered the complete and total elimination of danger, of deep ideological conflict, and of all high ambition.
The research breaks down the core values of this last man, and it reads like a modern consumer profile. They want warmth.
They want absolute equality, not in terms of opportunity, but in outcome, so that no one ever have to feel the sting of inadequacy or envy.
They are obsessed with living long, safe lives. They want entertainment constantly, but nothing too harrowing or challenging that might upset them.
They desire a little poison for pleasant dreams. Think of our reliance on alcohol, scrolling, or sleep aids. And ultimately, they just want a comfortable, agreeable death without pain.
And the specific physical imagery Nietzsche uses to describe them is incredibly striking and intentional. He describes the last man as blinking.
Zarathustra stands there and tries to evoke the ancient, terrifying wonder of the universe. He asks the crowd, what is a star? What is creation? What is a great longing?
And the last man simply looks back at him and blinks, like a docile, perfectly domesticated herd animal chewing its cud.
They don't even possess the cognitive or spiritual capacity to understand the questions anymore. The concepts of creation and longing are alien to them.
They just blink in passive bovine contentment. They turn to each other, smile their dull smiles, and say, "We have invented happiness," and they blink again.
That phrase, "we have invented happiness," is meant to be deeply, bitterly ironic, isn't it?
Because what they've invented isn't happiness at all. What they have invented is merely a numbing universal comfort, a spiritual anesthesia.
And if we connect this text written in the 1880s to our modern culture, as the research carefully does, the parallels are genuinely unsettling.
We measure our invented happiness in likes, in follower counts, in the speed of our convenience apps, in how many steps we didn't have to take today.
We have managed to turn human contentment into a cheap, consumable product. We are the blinking herd.
The societal implications of this are vast. The research brings in a vital historical perspective here to show how dangerous this state is.
It cites a quote from Dietrich Bonhoeffer, the German theologian who was writing under the terrifying shadow of the rising Nazi regime.
He observed something crucial about human nature. Comfort and conformity produce a terrifying kind of moral paralysis in a population.
When a people grow too comfortable, when their primary objective is merely maintaining their velvet cage, they become entirely unwilling to risk that comfort for higher principles.
They will willingly surrender their freedom of thought, their moral agency, and their very liberty, all in exchange for guaranteed, undisturbed safety.
It's the ultimate devil's bargain. You give me a comfortable couch and a screen, and you can take my civil liberties.
The research also connects this modern phenomenon all the way back to Plato's warnings about the inherent decay of democracy.
Plato argued thousands of years ago that a society blessed with too much freedom, too much wealth, and too much ease eventually begins to rot from the inside.
It produces successive generations of citizens who are increasingly fragile. They become so entirely incapable of enduring any hardship or intellectual friction that when a genuine, inevitable crisis hits, an economic collapse, a war, a pandemic,
They panic. And in their panic, because they have no internal resilience, they look outwardly for salvation. They desperately seek out tyrants.
they beg for authoritarian strongmen who promise to restore order and rebuild their comfortable shelter.
They happily, cheeringly trade their democratic sovereignty for the illusion of total security.
It is a profound historical warning. When a population is lulled into passivity by the last man's invented happiness, they lose the very resilience required to maintain a free society.
So this paints a very clear, very grim picture of the problem. We have the last man, blinking placidly in his velvet cage, waiting for a tyrant to keep him safe.
But what is the alternative? If this comfort is the enemy, if the frictionless life is a trap, what does the architecture of a truly great, meaningful life actually look like?
The research dives deep into academic philosophical analysis here to answer a fundamental question. What actually constitutes greatness? Because it's not just about being a morally nice person who volunteers on weekends, right?
Right. Being harmless is not the same as being great. The research explores a fascinating, ongoing philosophical debate on this exact question.
It breaks the concept of greatness down into two main opposing views. First, there is what academics call the pure character view.
This theory suggests that greatness is entirely internal. It is exclusively about the qualities of your soul.
Do you possess traits like self-reverence? Do you have the ability to endure deep solitude without losing your mind? Do you have resilience, integrity, and a certain nobility of spirit?
Under the pure character view, if you possess these internal traits, you are deemed a great individual, regardless of how those traits manifest in the real world.
But the research is quick to point out a massive, almost fatal flaw with that specific view.
By focusing only on internal traits, it risks letting extreme underachievers into the pantheon of human greatness.
Consider a thought experiment. You would have an individual with a profoundly noble soul, a brilliant mind, and deep resilience. But they choose to sit on their couch all day, every day.
They never write the book, they never start the business, they never lead the movement, they accomplish absolutely nothing tangible in the physical world.
While they might be nice or interesting, that completely passive existence simply does not align with what Nietzsche or what any of us intuitively considers true greatness. Greatness requires impact.
Which leads us to the second theory, the one the research ultimately attributes to Nietzsche himself, the compound view.
This view argues that greatness is a combination. It requires both. You absolutely must have those noble internal character traits, the fortitude, the vision, the resilience.
But you must also execute. You must translate that internal power into external reality. You must produce great works of art, conquer massive obstacles, or shape human culture in a meaningful, undeniable way.
Potential is not enough. Greatness demands actualization.
And here's where the conversation becomes incredibly nuanced and slightly uncomfortable, because the research brings up the unavoidable role of luck in achieving greatness.
We in the modern world love the myth of the purely self-made individual. We love to believe that if you just work hard enough and have good character, greatness is guaranteed.
But the research presents a brilliant historical thought experiment to shatter this illusion. The case of Alexander the Great versus Alexander the Not-So-Great.
Let's really flesh this out. Imagine two young men living in ancient Macedonia. We have Alexander, the one we know from history, and right down the street we have another guy. Let's call him Alexander the Not-So-Great.
Both of these men possess the exact same world-class military genius. They possess the exact same noble character, the exact same unyielding ambition to conquer the known world, and the exact same charisma to lead armies.
Internally, psychologically, they are absolutely identical. They both spend years preparing.
But on the very eve of the massive campaign to cross into Asia and conquer the Persian Empire, a mosquito bites Alexander the Not-So-Great.
He catches a fever and dies in his tent before ever drawing his sword in a major battle.
Meanwhile, the Alexander we know crosses the Hellespont, survives countless battles, never gets the fever, and goes on to entirely reshape the map of the ancient world.
The profound philosophical question here is, are they both great? According to the compound view, and according to Nietzsche, the brutal answer is no.
Alexander the Not-So-Great had the potential, he had the character, but he did not achieve the impact. Greatness, therefore, requires actually pulling off the monumental achievement.
And what this implies is that taking massive existential risks is mandatory. You cannot be great from the safety of the couch.
But it also means that true greatness is incredibly rare and fragile because it is, in some very real ways, a lucky hit.
You have to build a character, you have to take the terrifying risk, and then you have to survive the unpredictable, chaotic variables of reality, like mosquitoes, betrayals, or economic crashes that are entirely out of your control.
That is a tough pill to swallow. It means you can do everything right, embrace the struggle, and still fail to achieve greatness due to sheer bad luck.
But that risk of failure is exactly what makes the pursuit valuable. And this leads us directly to the core of why suffering and difficulty are so vital to this architecture of a meaningful life.
We have to completely re-examine how we, as a society, value suffering. The research draws a sharp, illuminating distinction between two types of value: instrumental value and contributory value.
Yes, this distinction is arguably the most important conceptual tool in this entire deep dive. Let's break it down very clearly.
What Nietzsche calls herd morality, which is the viewpoint of the last man, and frankly, the viewpoint of most of modern society, views suffering as having only instrumental value.
Think of instrumental value like paying a toll at a toll booth on a highway. You don't want to pay the toll. The act of handing over your money brings you no joy.
The toll itself is viewed as an inherent negative. But you pay it anyway because it is the instrument, the necessary, unavoidable means to an end. It allows you to drive on the road and get to your desired destination, like a beach vacation.
Now, if a brand new, magically paved road opened up right next to it that went to the exact same beach but had no toll booth, you would take the free road immediately.
You would bypass the toll because the toll has no value in and of itself.
In this common view, all human suffering, hard work, stress, physical pain, emotional heartbreak is just a regrettable toll booth on the way to happiness.
If we could somehow achieve greatness, wealth, and fulfillment without any suffering whatsoever, we absolutely would. We'd take the frictionless road every time.
Exactly. That is the instrumental view. But Nietzsche proposes a truly radical revaluation of this entire concept.
He argues that in the pursuit of a great life, suffering actually possesses contributory value.
The suffering is not the annoying toll booth you want to bypass. The suffering is the actual structural pavement of the road itself.
It is a constitutive, inseparable ingredient of the final good you are trying to achieve. Let's really pause and let that concept sink in because it changes how you view every difficult thing in your life.
Suffering contributes value to the whole. To make this tangible, the research offers a beautiful analogy about art.
Consider a massive, complex, profoundly moving oil painting, perhaps a masterpiece by Rembrandt. If you look closely, the painting is filled with dark, somber, muddy, and perhaps individually ugly colors: shadows, blacks, deep browns.
Now, a naive viewer might say those dark colors are just instrumental. They just exist to make the bright yellows and reds pop out more. If we could, we should just remove the dark colors and have a painting of only bright, happy colors.
But an art critic knows that is absurd. Those dark, struggling colors are not just instrumental tools. They are an essential, actively contributing part of the masterpiece's total, overwhelming beauty.
You cannot selectively remove the darkness without completely destroying the painting itself. It loses its depth, its contrast, its soul.
It is a brilliant way to understand it. Nietzsche argues that the difficulty, the profound struggle, the nights of self-doubt, the physical pain endured in the relentless pursuit of a noble goal, these things actively make the final achievement fundamentally more valuable.
The struggle weaves itself into the DNA of the victory. A trophy won against a terrible opponent is cherished forever. A trophy handed to you for walking across an empty field is meaningless.
This concept of contributory value perfectly explains the aestheticism of the heroic. It explains why, across all human cultures and centuries, we are drawn to admire tragic heroes.
The research specifically mentions figures from literature and myth: Achilles at Troy, Sarpedon, and Shakespeare's Macbeth.
We do not admire these figures because they figured out how to live easy, comfortable, heavily optimized lives. We are drawn to them, we write songs about them, precisely because of their struggle, their flaws, and their suffering.
The Greeks actually had a specific word for this concept: agon. It translates roughly to contest, struggle, or conflict.
True heroism absolutely requires agon, and critically, it requires mortality. It requires the genuine, terrifying risk of permanent loss.
The research points out a fascinating quirk in Greek mythology regarding this. The gods themselves cannot truly be heroes.
Think about Zeus or Apollo. They are powerful, yes, but they are immortal. They're invulnerable. When a god goes down to the battlefield at Troy to fight, they risk absolutely nothing. For them, the Trojan War is just a video game.
But when a mortal human like Achilles steps onto that same battlefield, he is risking his one finite life. He is risking oblivion.
The breathtaking beauty of the hero is rooted entirely in their vulnerability, their willingness to face total destruction for the sake of a higher self-chosen goal. Without the risk of the dark colors, there is no masterpiece.
And to layer one more analogy on this, the research uses a musical comparison that I think synthesizes this perfectly.
Think of a piece of music. If a composer writes a song using only perfectly harmonious, resolved, mathematically pleasant major chords, what do you get?
You get elevator music, you get a jingle for a soap commercial. It is pleasant, but it is entirely forgettable and ultimately boring.
What makes a grand symphony like Beethoven's Ninth so magnificent, so capable of moving us to tears, is its use of dissonance.
It is the intentional introduction of musical tension. It is the clashing notes, the minor keys, the aggressive tempos that build up an unbearable tension in the listener, demanding a resolution.
Just as musical dissonance is an absolute requirement to make a chord progression profoundly beautiful, human suffering, struggle, and resistance are the absolute requirements to make a human life magnificent.
It is the tension that gives the final resolution its overwhelming power.
Right.
A life without dissonance, a life lived entirely in the velvet cage of the comfort zone, is a life without depth. It is elevator music.
So the question becomes incredibly practical. How do we actually break out of this? We know the velvet cage is a trap. We know the last man is a warning. We know we need dissonance.
But how do we actively introduce it when our entire biology screams at us to stay comfortable?
To answer this, the research introduces the deeply introspective psychological framework of the Danish philosopher Søren Kierkegaard.
Kierkegaard is phenomenal for understanding the internal mechanics of this transition. He outlined different distinct stages of human existence, representing the evolution of the self.
The first stage, the one that corresponds almost perfectly to our modern existence inside the velvet cage, is what he called the aesthetic stage.
Now, when we hear aesthetic today, we think of Instagram feeds or interior design, but Kierkegaard means something much deeper.
In the aesthetic stage, an individual's entire life is driven by two simple imperatives: the pursuit of sensory pleasure and the desperate avoidance of pain, boredom, and commitment.
It is a life characterized by constant fleeting distraction. The aesthete curates their experiences to ensure the vibes are always pleasant.
They jump from relationship to relationship when things get hard, from job to job when they get bored, from one entertainment to the next. They refuse to be tied down by heavy responsibilities.
On the surface, the aesthetic life looks fun. It looks like freedom. But Kierkegaard, with incredible psychological insight, saw a profound, terrifying emptiness at the core of this lifestyle.
Living permanently in the comfort zone traps you permanently in this aesthetic stage. And here is the tragedy. Because the aesthete never fully commits to anything difficult, because they always leave the room when the dissonance begins.
They never actually forge a true self. Their identity is just a loose collection of fleeting tastes and experiences. When the music stops, they don't know who they are.
This inevitably leads to what Kierkegaard calls despair, a deep, hollow, unshakable sense of meaninglessness that no amount of pleasure can cure.
So how do you escape the despair of the aesthetic stage? You have to encounter something terrifying. You have to encounter what Kierkegaard famously and brilliantly called the dizziness of freedom.
This is one of the most powerful concepts in existentialism. He defines this dizziness as dread or angst, anxiety.
But we have to be very careful here. He is not talking about the everyday clinical anxiety you feel about a looming deadline at work or an awkward social event.
No, this is something much more fundamental. This is existential anxiety. Kierkegaard uses a visceral metaphor. It is the sudden, breath-stealing vertigo you feel when you stand on the very edge of a massive, sheer cliff.
When you look down into the abyss, you feel fear, yes. But the fear isn't just the biological worry that you might accidentally slip and fall.
The truly terrifying realization, the source of the dizziness, is your sudden awareness that you have the absolute, unhindered freedom to jump. Nothing is stopping you.
Kierkegaard's anxiety is the overwhelming, crushing awareness of your own infinite possibilities, coupled with the terrible weight of absolute responsibility for the choices you make.
It's the realization that you are holding the steering wheel of your life And you could jerk it into oncoming traffic at any moment, or you could steer it toward a mountain peak.
The comfort zone, the routines, the endless scrolling, the safe job is just a massive defense mechanism we've built to hide this cliff edge from ourselves.
We meticulously stick to our predictable routines precisely so we don't have to look out at the vast, terrifying horizon of what we could theoretically become if we actually tried.
Precisely. We narrow our field of vision to the screen in front of us because the horizon is too demanding. But to move forward, to escape the despair, Kierkegaard says we must make a leap.
We must transition from the aesthetic stage to what he calls the ethical stage.
And again, we must clarify terms. In Kierkegaard's framework, moving to the ethical stage is not about suddenly becoming a good person who obeys societal rules or gives to charity.
It is a deeply internal ethical act toward yourself. It means making the terrifying decision to choose a self.
It means planting a flag and making commitments. And to do this, you have to confront this existential anxiety head-on without flinching and without reaching for a distraction.
You have to voluntarily step out of the velvet cage and realize something profoundly counterintuitive. That the anxiety you feel when you face a massive challenge is not a stop sign.
When you are about to have that difficult conversation, or quit the safe job to start the business, or finally write the book, your body floods with adrenaline. Your hands shake.
Your brain screams at you to turn back to safety. But that feeling isn't a warning that you are making a mistake. It is an invitation.
It is the dizziness of freedom telling you that you are standing on the precipice of real life. It is the feeling of leaving the script behind and entering authentic existence.
That reframing is essential. When your hands shake before doing something bold, that is not a signal of failure. That is the biological and spiritual recognition that you are finally, perhaps for the first time in your life, taking absolute responsibility for your own becoming.
But moving into this ethical stage requires a leap. It cannot be reasoned out on a spreadsheet. It requires a decisive, irrational act of will.
Okay, so let's synthesize where we are. We have thoroughly diagnosed the velvet cage and the salary trap. We've looked at the horrifying, blinking future of the last man.
We've dismantled the idea of the toll booth and understood the contributory value of suffering. And we've stood on the edge as Kierkegaard's cleft, feeling the dizziness of freedom.
The theory is laid out perfectly, but how do we actually do this? In the modern world right now, how do we awaken what the research refers to as the Übermensch?
To answer that, we must first properly define Nietzsche's concept of the Übermensch, usually translated as the overman or superman.
Pop culture has severely distorted this term, so we must be precise. The Übermensch is absolutely not a comic book hero with heat vision.
It is also not a political conqueror or a tyrant who rules over others. The Übermensch is a deeply internal ideal. It is an individual who conquers themselves.
It is someone who looks at the inherited values of the herd, the values of the last man, the pursuit of mere comfort, and actively rejects them.
The Übermensch creates their own meaning in a universe that doesn't inherently provide any, and possesses the profound, almost terrifying psychological strength to take all of their suffering, all of their tragedies, and synthesize them into fuel for their own greatness.
And Nietzsche provides the ultimate, unforgiving litmus test to find out if you are approaching the state of the Übermensch. It is the concept of amor fati, the love of fate.
This is, without a doubt, the heaviest, most demanding psychological exercise you can ever undertake. I want you, the listener, to try this right now.
Imagine that a demon crept into your room at your loneliest hour, and this demon told you that this life, your exact life, as you live it now and as you have lived it in the past, you will have to live over again and innumerable times more.
There will be nothing new in it. Every single agonizing pain, every fleeting joy, every mundane, boring Tuesday afternoon, every devastating heartbreak, every humiliating failure, and every brilliant triumph will return to you in the exact same sequence for all eternity.
The question is, could you look at that demon, look at the prospect of eternal recurrence of your exact life, and joyfully, enthusiastically say, yes?
It is a devastatingly hard question. Because to say yes to Amor Fati means you do not wish for a single microscopic detail of your past to be different. Not forward, not backward, not in all eternity.
If you wish away the heartbreak, you wish away the empathy it taught you. If you wish away the failure, you wish away the resilience it built.
You must recognize that every struggle, every tear, and every agonizing moment of dissonance was a necessary contributory brushstroke in the masterpiece of who you are today.
The last man, the person living in the velvet cage, would scream in absolute horror at this demon because their life is empty, a repeating loop of hollow distractions. To repeat it eternally would be hell.
But the Übermensch embraces the demon's offer because they have intentionally forged deep meaning out of the fire of their experiences. They love their fate because they chose it.
To make this high-level philosophy practical and grounded, the research shares a couple of incredible ancient parables set in a monastery.
These stories perfectly encapsulate the daily mechanics of embracing dissonance. Let's look at the first one, the parable of the stone and the shoe.
A wise, seasoned master is walking with a young, privileged student who has just joined the monastery. The student is used to comfort.
The master stops, picks up a small, somewhat sharp stone from the path, hands it to the student, and instructs him to place it inside his shoe and continue walking.
The student is confused, but obeys. With every single step, the stone presses sharply into his heel. It's not crippling, but it is deeply irritating.
As the hours pass, the student grows increasingly agitated, impatient, and deeply uncomfortable. His mind is entirely focused on the friction.
Finally, unable to take it anymore, he stops and demands to know why the master is forcing him to walk like this.
The master's reply contains the entire secret of the deep dive. He looks at the student and says, "Because discomfort is honest. It speaks to you and comfort refuses to."
Let's unpack that. Comfort is fundamentally a liar. Comfort tells you that you have arrived. It whispers that you are finished growing, that you require no further refinement, that you can safely go to sleep.
It lulls you into the numbness of the last man. The stone in the shoe, the intentional, voluntary introduction of friction into your daily life, forces you to stay radically awake to your own existence.
It prevents you from sleepwalking through your days. There is a second observation from the monastery in the research that builds perfectly on this.
The master spends years observing the different types of travelers who arrive at the gates seeking spiritual purpose. He notices two distinct groups.
Some travelers arrive completely exhausted. They have been battered by the world. Perhaps they've suffered poverty, failure, or deep loss. They know hardship.
The other group arrives highly comfortable. They are perhaps wealthy, successful by societal standards, having lived deeply insulated, frictionless lives.
And the master notices an odd, deeply counterintuitive pattern. The exhausted, battered travelers adapt to the rigorous life of the monastery and grow spiritually much, much faster.
It seems backwards at first glance. You would think the comfortable, well-rested people would have more energy for the rigorous study and meditation.
But psychologically, it makes perfect sense. The exhausted travelers had already tasted deep discomfort. They were intimately familiar with the texture of suffering.
They had already paid the toll and walked the rough pavement. So when they were introduced to the strict, demanding discipline of the monastery waking at 4 a.m., fasting, manual labor discipline didn't feel like an enemy.
It felt like a companion, a familiar, structured tool they could use to shape themselves.
But the comfortable travelers struggled immensely. Their minds constantly wandered. They left tasks half-finished. They complained.
They wanted the deep peace and wisdom of the monastery, but they were entirely unwilling to do the grueling, painful internal work required to create that peace. They wanted the masterpiece without the dark colors.
The master eventually turns to one of these struggling, comfortable travelers and asks a piercing question. When was the last time you did something truly difficult, entirely on purpose?
And the traveler stands there, blinking, unable to remember. That is the quiet tragedy of the velvet cage. You forget how to struggle.
So how do we fix this today? We aren't all going to move to a monastery. The research offers 3 highly actionable, modern steps to begin dismantling the velvet cage and escaping the trap.
Let's walk through them in detail. Number 1, start small.
This is crucial. When people hear this philosophy, they often get fired up and think they need to quit their corporate job, sell all their possessions, and move to a cabin in the woods tomorrow.
That usually leads to burnout and a quick retreat back to the cage. Escaping the comfort zone is not a one-time cliff jump. It is a muscle that must be methodically trained.
The research advises starting with one intentionally uncomfortable thing daily. It must be small enough to actually do, but uncomfortable enough to cause a flinch.
It could be as simple as taking a freezing cold shower for 2 minutes every morning to shock your nervous system. It could be raising your hand and speaking up in a meeting where you usually hide in the back and stay silent.
It could be leaving your phone at home and taking a completely new, unfamiliar route without a GPS, allowing yourself to feel the mild panic of being temporarily lost.
The specific action matters less than the repetition. By doing this daily, you are slowly retraining your nervous system to tolerate and eventually even crave the unknown. You are putting the stone in your shoe.
That brings us to step number 2. Reframe fear.
When we finally push ourselves to stand on the edge of Kierkegaard's cliff, our brain's ancient survival mechanism kicks in and screams at us. The internal monologue is always negative. What if I fail? What if I look stupid? What if I lose my money?
The research suggests a powerful cognitive behavioral technique here, flipping the script. Instead of allowing your brain to loop on what if I fail, force yourself to ask, what will I learn from this, even if it goes completely wrong?
Or, even more powerfully, allow yourself to ask, what if I win? What if I rise to the occasion and discover I am 10 times more capable than I thought?
Fear is a tyrant, but it loses its tyrannical power over you the moment you stop viewing it as an emergency warning system telling you to retreat and start viewing it as a compass.
In the pursuit of greatness, the thing you are most afraid of doing is almost exactly the thing you need to do next.
And finally, number 3, practice mindfulness inside the discomfort. This is the hardest step.
When you actively step into an uncomfortable situation, say giving a public speech or having a hard conversation, your brain will flood your body with cortisol. It will send desperate signals demanding you retreat back to safety, back to the cage.
In those intense moments, you cannot logic your way out of the panic. The research suggests you must return to your body, return to your breath.
Stay entirely present with the physical burning sensation of the discomfort. Observe your heart racing, observe your palms sweating, but do it without judgment. Don't label it as bad, just observe it as energy.
This mindfulness acts as an anchor. It keeps you in the room, and most importantly, it reminds your primal brain of a deep philosophical truth. The pain of the struggle, the burning in your lungs, the social awkwardness, it's all temporary.
But the expansion of your character, the permanent widening of your comfort zone, is forever.
To wrap all this together, the research leaves us with a beautiful, enduring analogy from the natural world, the metamorphosis of the caterpillar.
We all know the story, but we rarely think about the violence of it. A caterpillar does not simply get tired, fall asleep on a leaf, and magically wake up the next morning with beautiful wings.
To become a butterfly, the caterpillar must actively encase itself in a dark, incredibly confining cocoon. Once inside, it doesn't just grow. It essentially digests itself.
It releases enzymes that dissolve its old body into a biological soup. It endures a total catastrophic structural breakdown of everything it once was in order to reconstruct itself into something capable of flight.
We are no different. You cannot bypass the dark, terrifying, uncomfortable confinement of the struggle if you ever want to fly.
The discomfort isn't a mistake. It is the crucible. To actively avoid it, to stay inside the velvet walls, is to permanently arrest your own development.
You remain a caterpillar forever, wondering what the sky looks like.
As we bring this deep dive to a close, let's gently trace our steps back through the terrain we've covered today.
We started by waking up in the velvet cage of the modern world, seduced by the quiet, dangerous illusion of the salary trap. Recognizing how easily we trade our finite, precious lives for predictable servitude and perfectly climate-controlled numbness.
We explored Schopenhauer's agonizing pendulum swinging between endless, painful desire and suffocating boredom, and then we witnessed Nietzsche's radical, world-changing pivot.
The realization that we are built not for mere survival, but for power, for the joyful embrace of resistance.
We stared into the vacant, blinking eyes of the last man, recognizing the terrifying, highly relevant prophecy of a society that has invented a hollow, numbing happiness at the cost of its soul.
We fundamentally dismantled the idea that suffering is merely a toll booth to be avoided, revealing its profound contributory value. The essential dark colors of the painting, the necessary dissonance that gives the music of a truly magnificent life its power.
And we stood together on the precipice of Kierkegaard's dizziness of freedom, acknowledging that the anxiety of choice, the dread of the unknown, is not a warning, but the very invitation to an authentic, ethical existence.
I want to speak directly to you right now. Your potential, that massive, terrifying, beautiful thing inside of you, is not hiding from you. It is not lost.
It is not something you have to buy a course to find. It is simply waiting. It is waiting for you to find the courage to leave your comfort zone, to step out of the velvet cage long enough to actually meet it.
We want to profoundly thank you for taking this heavy, challenging journey with us today. We ask that you join us again at Topikia. Inner clarity for future deep dives into the self, into the challenging depths of philosophy, and into the practical mechanics of a truly lived life.
And as we part ways today, returning to the friction of the real world, we want to leave you with one final lingering thought drawn directly from the research, something to mull over in the quiet moments of your day.
Nietzsche wrote, with characteristic bluntness, that the snake which cannot cast its skin has to die. as will the minds which are prevented from changing their opinions. They cease to be mind.
So I want you to ask yourself today, right now, as this ends, what old, comfortable, deeply familiar skin are you desperately clinging to? And what magnificent, dangerous, incredibly powerful version of yourself is suffocating underneath it, just waiting for you to let it breathe?
Take care of yourselves out there. Put the stone in your shoe. Step into the unknown.
We will see you next time.